Welcome to day 3 of the 11th edition of the Sustainable Innovation Forum. I'm Nick Gowing, the founder and director of the Thinking the Unthinkable project. This morning we have special content for you. The youth agenda, the next gen, Gen Y, Gen Z. Later I'll be sharing reflections on an extraordinary day 2 yesterday, but for now let's focus on this youth agenda. It's being brought to you with the support of the Global Action Plan and earthday.org, and it's a supporting platform of the Race to Zero campaign and part of London Climate Action Week as well. This is a critical moment, literally as I speak. We're expecting Boris Johnson to be meeting, the British Prime Minister to be meeting business leaders. Why do I say that? Because he's committing himself to a significant green recovery, which he summarises in the papers today as one of the most innovative and ambitious programmes of job creation we have ever known. 10 points, read them if you can. But we want to engage on how business can better engage with young people. What is the role of climate education in progressing the future green agenda and industries? Integrating climate education into official government school curriculums, no mention of that yet in what the Prime Minister here in the UK is saying. Please note this session is being recorded. It'll be available to watch again on demand if you want, and there'll also be a transcript available as well. Now, we want to hear from you. It's been very successful in the last 2 days. We've had a lot of comments, a lot of questions. Simply go to the Sustainable Innovation platform on which you are probably watching this output at the moment. Go to the SIF platform and then press live discussion, a big tab lower down in the screen where you're watching. Then click on questions. Type your question in the Q&A box, or it can be a comment as well. A lot of comments yesterday. Start with who you'd like to address, and also let us know which organisation you're from. That is, if you're from an organisation. If it's just you, don't bother about telling us about an organisation. What are the other ways you can communicate and keep up to date with what is happening? These are the socials. Hashtag Climate Action Live, all one word there. Hashtag Sustainable Innovation Forum, SIF20. Hashtag Time You Act as well. And here you can follow us at climate_action_. Remember the second underscore at the end. So what's coming up over the next 2.5 hours? We'll be having a break, a half-hour break in about half an hour from now. Climate 8 Leaders Live, first of all, the climate calls brought by the Youth Climate Summit ambassadors. We'll be welcoming 3 of those youth ambassadors. We'll explore the importance of the Youth Climate Summit, which took place last week, and introduce the youth ambassadors' calls for business and governments to act on climate change, which is why I mentioned what the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is doing at some point this morning in Downing Street, probably virtually though. And secondly, there'll be a virtual panel discussion. How can businesses engage with and support the youth climate movement? Now, it's not going to be me who's going to be running this. Let me introduce you now to someone from the next generation who's going to take it right through the next 2.5 hours. Let me introduce you to Clover Hogan, who's a 20-year-old climate activist. Hello, Clover. A youth spokesperson and the founder of Force for Nature. Welcome. In March 2009, you launched Force for Nature to help young people realize the potential to create change and support the emerging generation of leaders to become custodians of a future by their own design. And my goodness, things are moving very fast. So Clover, from me to you, it's over to you to take it away for the next 2.5 hours.
Thank you so much for that brilliant introduction. So as you've already said, I'm a 21-year-old climate activist. I'm a trustee to the environmental charity Global Action Plan and the founder and executive director of Force for Nature. So as you touched on, we really serve as a launch pad to help young people step up rather than shut down in the face of the climate crisis. So I'm very delighted to be moderating the session today. First talking with some of the fantastic youth ambassadors from last week's Youth Climate Summit, which was 5 themed days of online climate learning, discovery and action coordinated by Global Action Plan. The summit was hosted on the Transform Our World Teacher Resource Hub, which I highly recommend you go and check out, whether you are an educator or otherwise, which is kind of stock full of amazing free resources to really support environmental education, including how to support young people to navigate some of the difficult feelings that come up in the face of climate change, like climate anxiety. Now, this summit created 88 hours of new free video content, which is now available at transform-our-world.org, which I highly recommend you go and check out. During the summit, our team of youth ambassadors spent the week interviewing
Now we're coming back to you with an apology, but it's outside our control. There was a bandwidth crash and we lost everything. But Clover is now joining me again. Clover, I hope you're there. And please pick up from where you left off. We reckon we heard about a minute of you at the beginning. So take it away and imagine that we're starting all over again. We'll re-energize the audience, re-energize the next generation who are watching this. But imagine that we only saw probably and heard the first minute of your remark. Go ahead.
Sure thing. It wouldn't be a virtual event without some tech issues, would it? So once again, delighted to be here. So I'm going to be moderating this session today, where we're really bringing together the energy of youth with the knowledge of experience. So first, I'm going to be in conversation with 3 of our brilliant youth climate ambassadors who are going to be presenting the 5 climate calls that we came up with at the end of last week's Youth Climate Summit. These are calls and commitments that are being asked of from business and government. And then we're going to be in conversation with a panel of experts and industry leaders to see how these asks really show up and translate to the real world in terms of transformative climate action and transformative regulation and government change. So with that, I'm going to also introduce a quick recap video just looking at where we arrived last week with these youth climate calls and showcasing all of the incredible young people and teachers, educators who came together to make it happen.
This is an SOS from the kids. All the grown-ups take note of this. We're finding our voice, calling you out. You can't leave the world in fire and drought. This is an SOS from the kids. Please change the story. Rewrite the plot. This beautiful love cannot be lost. Stop hurting our planet like you don't care. There's only one world for us to share. This is an SOS from the kids. All the grown-ups take note of this. Wake up and see that you must make a change. The riches you seek will all be washed away. This is an SOS from the kids.
Awesome. So it is now with immense pleasure that I get to introduce our 3 youth climate ambassadors. We have Adarsh, Andra, and Hannah. So thank you so much for joining me, guys. I'd love to kick off right with the youth climate calls. And Adarsh, if we start with you, looking at food and farming and also the protection of environmental zones and ecosystems, could you tell me a little bit more about these particular calls and why they personally resonate for you?
Yeah, definitely. So the first call that we decided upon last Friday was setting up specialist protection areas for all carbon sinks, such as peatlands and forests, with the funds that businesses impacting these areas pay into. In terms of why this is important, it might seem like peatlands and forests far away from cities where we work and go to school has nothing to do with us. But I believe we all have a collective responsibility as the generation currently in charge. And that means we have to make changes that will allow future generations to have a planet to live on and to enjoy the same luxuries we do now. And this is actually a really manageable job if we implement ideas such as setting up specialist protection areas. This benefits the world not only with lower levels of greenhouse gases, because these areas are carbon sinks, they take in carbon, so if we protect them, there's simply less greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. But this will also increase biodiversity in these ecosystems, steadying the rate of extinction of wild animal populations, which has skyrocketed over the last 50 years. That's something that is quite close to my heart, because looking up extinction, finding out that humans basically have caused the 6th mass extinction event, and increasing the biodiversity of these areas by protecting them will allow animal species to live without the risk of extinction from human factors, and also benefit us in terms of there are fewer greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. And the second youth call was to stop subsidizing farming that harms the planet, and instead subsidize regenerative farming and polycultures. What this basically means is that we want governments to financially support more sustainable farming practices. Polycultures don't only yield more crops, but they also support the biodiversity of an ecosystem, again, adding nutrients to the soil and making it a better carbon storage. And I think farming and food is something that we all have an impact on, because we all eat, obviously. And it's a nationwide industry. And if we can make that more sustainable through subsidizing farming that instead benefits the planet rather than harming it, I think that's a massive step forward in terms of what we can do for a greener future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Adash. And we see how inextricably linked both of those solutions really are. If we go over to you now, Andra, can you tell us about the two calls, one of which is for the green recovery and also circularity?
Yes, thank you, Clover. So basically, another one of the asks that was kind of picked by schools from all over the UK was that governments and businesses, for them to make good on the green recovery they keep talking about starting now, what that basically means is that any financial investment made by the government or business as part of the post-COVID-19 recovery should focus on activities which align themselves with targets with the target of maximum 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming and nature recovery, which will also help create green jobs as well as reduce the impact on climate and nature. And why I personally think that's really important right now is that we are facing the largest economic recession as a result of COVID-19. So scientists and economists have advised that a green recovery delivers the best economic, social, and environmental outcomes for the UK and Northern Ireland. So we have this huge window of opportunity to make those changes. And while we're at it, it might as well be green. It might as well be a future that gives people hope. And the second ask was about business and government to accelerate the transition to a circular economy using nature as a model with zero waste. And this should be delivered by specific legislation. What a circular economy is, it's one where we keep products and materials in use for as long as possible by basically making them durable and repairable and innovating materials on materials and processes, then recover and regenerate those new products. And so you get the idea, it goes kind of around in a circle. These actions will minimize the use of raw materials and energy and will basically create zero or minimal waste. And kind of the two biggest industries that need absolutely zero waste in order to kind of to save our planet are the fashion industry and plastic. And this is circular economy is so important, not only because we are kind of cutting down totally our impact on nature, but also a EU Commission report estimated that circular economy actually would save businesses around $630 billion annually, which is a huge amount of money that we're basically wasting right now. So I think in terms of the youth, we're really feeling strongly about this.
Thank you so much, Andra. And finally, Hannah, could you tell us about the final youth climate call that was decided on at the end of last week?
Yes, so our final youth climate call is one that's close to a lot of youth because it is all new schools to be carbon zero and for government and businesses to help existing schools achieve carbon zero by 2030. So this is important to a lot of us because school is where we go pretty much most of our time. So to encourage the youth to be more into the environment, to make schools carbon zero. Schools are a very big place where a lot of people go and they have a massive influence on the children they're teaching and the community around them. So if we make them carbon zero, then hopefully that'll cut down on carbon emissions anyway, but hopefully it'll encourage local communities and the children to think more about how their own homes can be carbon zero.
Thank you so much, Hannah. That's incredibly powerful, and I think especially so because each of these calls is asking for change at that system level. I think each of us can appreciate that there is no hope in another 10 years of incremental change, and so we really need a reset and a redesign on so many of the systems that we ourselves have inherited. It's interesting being here at the Sustainable Innovation Forum because I first attended SIF in 2015 as a youth climate ambassador and youth climate activist for COP21. And I arrived at the event kind of with starry-eyed optimism that everyone would kind of come together and change would happen overnight. And I left feeling quite disenfranchised and disillusioned, both by the very clear vested interest and also the rampant greenwashing. I'd be curious to hear from each of you what your thoughts are on a summit like this, on an event like this, and what you would actually ask of the business leaders and the decision makers who are listening in. You know, what do you not want to see going forward, and what do you want to see? What would success look like for you? And Andra, if we start with you.
So I totally feel like events like Youth Climate Summit are really, really important for spreading that message of kind of the mess we're in, basically, but also that when we come together as this one body, we can make a change, and all it takes is just one company to make that transition to a green economy, to green sustainable products, and that's all it takes, and everybody else will follow. And once we see that this green recovery is more sustainable and much cheaper long term, I think we will have a really good future. So I think what really keeps me going and what I really like about these events is that we have the opportunity to discuss these things, and I really think that we will see change from that, but we have to act upon every idea that we discuss.
Absolutely. It's not enough to make commitments. We need to follow them through with tangible action. Adash, how about you?
I agree with everything Andrea said. I think these events give us hope for the future. And I think we're going to see a greener future. But unfortunately, as much passion as an individual person can have, as much as any of the youth ambassadors could have, the system that we live in does still contribute towards climate change. And we have to see changes on a systems level, on an industry level, rather than on a personal level, because everyone can do things to reduce their emissions. For example, eating less meat, that's a great example. But it's not always as easy on a personal level. And if changes were to be made at a business level and at a government level, we would see a much larger impact on climate change, a much larger impact reducing climate change. But these events, they give us hope for the future. And it is great to be able to discuss these ideas, to brainstorm, and to kind of share our passion for the climate, because we all want to see changes. And as the future generation who is going to inherit this problem, and we are currently inheriting it, we want to make sure that we do better than the last generation and make the world safer for the future generations that will come.
Thank you, Adarsh. That was incredibly powerful, and especially this point around individual actions being great to reinforce positive values in the world that we want to create, and yet individual actions ultimately do not equate the individual decisions of those in positions of power, whose decisions equate many millions of individuals. And so I love how you frame that there. And then finally, Hannah, if you would like to share your thoughts as well, what would make this a success for you, and what is your ask of decision makers going forward?
Yeah, well, I agree with what the other two have said, so I don't have much to say. But what I would really ask is for businesses and government to set ambitious goals, not just to set a date that's quite far off and that you cannot do anything about right now. So you can wait and then in 5-10 years' time try and tackle it. I would say to set the goals and start working on them now, and to be really ambitious with them, because even if you don't achieve 100% what you wanted, even if you have got really ambitious goals, doing that 50% or 60% of what you wanted, going like 60% green, still is a massive change to the economy and climate emissions, and will make a big difference.
Absolutely. Well, I'm feeling energized and inspired after hearing those calls and hearing the determination and passion of each of you. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hello. Lovely to be joined by you all. So, having heard from our incredible youth climate ambassadors, we now are going to be facilitating a panel discussion to really understand how some of these youth climate calls can be translated to tangible action at the business and government level. So I'm delighted to be joined by this incredible lineup of speakers and panelists. First up, we have Sonia Graham, co-CEO of Global Action Plan. Sonia, I'd love to start and just hear a little bit from you about what GAP is doing to tackle climate change.
Sure, thank you, Clover. So we're an environmental charity and we're formed 27 years ago, and we develop cross-sector and society movements on issues that impact planetary and human health. So two issues in particular that we're working at the moment are air pollution and also consumerism. And on the latter, a lot of our work is with young people, so helping them to see and buck the many pressures that elevate status, wealth, power, self-interest above the really important compassion, community, and ultimately well-being. So a big part of what we've been doing recently has been responding to research that shows that despite the large number of young people caring deeply for other people in the planet, they generally don't think that others share their care and concern, and that's whether that's peers, parents, businesses, world leaders. And so for us, the Youth Climate Summit, which you've heard a little about already, was the start of us finding ways to bring really huge numbers of young people together to build that feeling of shared compassion and give everyone the confidence that we all want to start creating a better world, and that we should all start doing it. In terms of sorry, Clover.
No, you're all good, Sonia. We'll move through the introductions and we'll dive straight into the conversation. So next we have Dorothy, Head of Sustainable Business at Vodafone. I'd love to hear from you about how Vodafone is tackling climate change.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Clover, and thank you, Adesh, Hannah, and Andra for the calls. Good morning, everyone. I'm so pleased and thrilled and humbled and excited to be here, and also very touched. That video nearly had me in tears. So I'm a mother. I'm an impatient optimist. I'm on the board of a charity called Earthwatch, which has science as its heart. And then I also lead the Vodafone Sustainable Business Agenda. And with the Vodafone team, we're really trying to help build a digital society that works for everyone. So where everyone has access to connectivity and to the digital skills that you need to use the connectivity, but also to the services that make connectivity relevant, whether it's healthcare or education. And we're also working on building a digital society that doesn't hurt the planet and indeed helps decarbonize other sectors and helps protect biodiversity and the more efficient use of natural resources. That's our purpose. And it's the using the power of digital to build a better future and help deliver the decade of action and join the race to zero. And I joined Vodafone really because I want to step up in Clover's words and help make a difference for our planet. And the way I've chosen to do that in my kind of career is by working in very large organizations because they have a lot of reach and a lot of scale. So we have at Vodafone over 300 million mobile customers. We work in many countries across Europe and Africa. We work with thousands of companies, whether it's to buy things from them or sell them services. So there's that reach and that platform that I'm very excited about. And we're doing a lot on climate. I can't say that we're doing enough. Anyone does enough. There is so much to do, but we are reducing our own footprint. We'll be announcing a science-based target aligned to 1.5 degrees in the next few days. And also our previous targets have been aligned to science. But more importantly, we also believe that digital can make a difference for the world. So we set ourselves a target of enabling the reduction of 350 million tons of CO2 between now and 2030. So that's the equivalent of the annual emissions of a country like the UK. And we do that through, for example, smart meters, smart logistics, etc. So helping other sectors decarbonize by dematerializing. So that's something that we're really passionate about. And then we're also tackling e-waste, which is a huge problem, obviously, as well, and a material issue from our point of view. So I'll stop there as an introduction.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Doro. Next up, we have Tim Brooks, who is Vice President of Environmental Sustainability at LEGO. Tim, how are you guys setting the sustainability agenda and how are you pushing the needle to go further?
Yeah, thanks, Clover. And I think the same as Dorothy, just saying thank you to all the youth ambassadors. Really great input and deep knowledge there, which I think is super exciting for the future. In terms of LEGO, we focus on two main areas, climate, which you referenced, and materials. On climate, we've spent through our parent company just under $1 billion on renewable energy in the last 8 years. We own 2 offshore wind parks, one off the coast of Germany, one off the coast of the UK. On our own estate, we have about 11 megawatts of renewable energy completed, and we've got another 22 megawatts coming. And this is direct investment in solar panels on the roof of our factories. We're also working hard on energy efficiency, so reducing our energy, improving our energy efficiency by 15% over the last 8 years. So we have a fairly comprehensive package with our aim to be 100% balanced by renewable energy by 2017, which we did achieve and have maintained. And that's something that we continue to work on, both the energy efficiency, the on-site investment, as well as the off-site investment, and some certificates forming part of that mix. But we're really passionate about driving additionality, which is investing directly into new renewable assets. On the materials side, we're really pushing forward on the circular economy. We've had our sustainable materials program up and running since 2015, so we're a good few years into that. We've launched some bio-based materials. We're heavily researching and investing in recycled plastic. We are also promoting reuse, and I think reuse is a story that isn't told enough around products. And Lego's been compatible since 1958, so you can buy something off the shelves today or from a charity shop or have it passed down, and it works perfectly with anything we've made since the late 1950s. So we have a program called Replay, where we take back used bricks and process them, clean them, and we've given them out to 22,000 children across the world who are in need of play. So lots of things going on. We can talk about them more as well, but we don't have all the answers. It's we're not saying we're perfect. It's work in progress. At the end of the day, we're across our value chain, we're 1.2 million tons of carbon, but we're really, really putting our money where our mouth is and investing significant amounts of money into renewables and into sustainable materials and circular economy.
Thanks very much, Tim. Finally, we have Jennifer Morgan, the Executive Director of Greenpeace. Now, Jennifer, I think most of us will be familiar with the decades and decades long history of incredible work that Greenpeace has been doing for the environment and for climate, setting that agenda perhaps before anyone else. I'd love to hear the macro overview of how you're driving this forward today, how you're driving transformative action, and I'd love to hear your reflections and thoughts on the business element of this specifically, and perhaps reflecting on what we've already heard from the panel about the role of business to take ownership of these huge, complex challenges.
Sure thing. It's really great to be here. And so thanks for the opportunity. I'm honored. And I think as a whole, we adults need to listen a lot more to youth and the ideas that have come forward today, but many ideas that are there. And I love the focus on systems change. I think that's where we need to be right now, and the focus on short-term targets. All that was said, I think, is fantastic. Maybe before jumping quickly into your questions, I just, for Greenpeace over time, youth has always been incredibly important, whether it be handing our social media channels over to Fridays for Future, or working with youth, for example, in Norway, to sue the government over oil leases up in the North Sea, or even, a campaign with the Girl Guides and Girl Scouts on Lego, where we worked actually together and won a campaign, which is great, that Lego moved to stop a partnership with Shell. And now we're active, actually, and maybe that's a good bridge for your question, in Australia, where we're really working and hoping that Vodafone there is going to commit to 100% renewables, because it's done that in other parts of the world, and we're not sure why it's not possible to do it in Australia. So I think our drive forward today is really about the fact that we're in a disruption. And we heard that in the green recovery recommendation. I think I can just support with whole heart that funding needs to not be going into fossil fuels. And that's where you see, and that's where Greenpeace can come in and help and support that the fossil fuel industry is working to get that money rather than it going to people. And so getting that, you having this moment of disruption actually change and have the investments and the funding that's going in. I think on the business side of it, and then I'll stop. I think, maybe two thoughts. I just think kind of voluntary initiatives anymore, we just don't have any time for them. We actually need the regulation, and we need companies to be engaged in setting those regulations. So we need companies to get that ambitious set of goals for 1.5, for example. And the other is just the level of opportunity that is there for companies that grasp it, but they have to help create it. And Greenpeace supporters and youth around the world, I think, are working to make that happen. So let me stop there. I've got lots of other ideas, but let's have a conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And I have been prompted at this point to remind everyone listening in that there is a Q&A function as well. Obviously, we're strapped for time, but if you do have questions, please add them to the chat box and we'll do our best to answer them. But thank you so much for those introductions. I suppose my first question right off the back of these youth climate calls, Jennifer, as you touched on, the changes that are being asked for are at that system level, and I think for a long time, especially in the world of business, we've seen sustainability through the lens of incrementalism, and we've seen sustainability through the lens of putting the onus on the individual consumer rather than challenging the very foundations that are driving forward this kind of endless growth economy and a driving forward rampant commodification of nature and lack of accountability for pollution, climate emissions, etc. I'd love to hear from you, having heard these youth climate calls from circularity through to a green recovery, through to actually stopping subsidies for an incredibly destructive animal agricultural industry. What does it look like for business to shift from a place of doing less harm to actually doing more good? And rather than the product or service kind of being an end goal, the product or service really being a vehicle for solving these huge problems. I'd be happy for anyone to pick up on this one.
Thanks. Yeah, I can only say excellent work by on all of these recommendations. And I think each of them pick up really important pieces that are about a systems change. So I think the first one, maybe obviously fundamental to be protecting these areas, but also what I thought was particularly interesting and part of a systems change as well is who pays for that protection and who pays for also damages that are being done to natural areas, but also to people. And I think having a system that doesn't depend on offsets of, you can do more to pollute if you pay to protect, but rather having it be part of the responsibility of companies, particularly those that have caused a lot of the damages to protect, I think is a really important thing. And there's a lot of work happening there. So I think that is incredibly smart. And linking into the farming, I mean, indeed, we need to move away from a system where industrialized farming systems are the ones that are supported by the subsidies around the world. And I think also really be looking at food rights for people and for smaller farmers, and where, for example, in the green recovery, those funds are going into, so that those food systems are much more resilient and just and ecologically sound. And on the circular economy, I think it's incredibly important, but I would add into it, because I think we've learned that the circular economy alone isn't going to save us. What our experience is that companies often just pick the parts that suit them when it comes in, but we actually really need to slow down things. So, for example, I'm really pleased to hear about the reuse piece, but it's also the reduce. And I think this is particularly important in the plastics field, where companies will make commitments to reuse or recycle, but we know that even the recycling system is not working. So we need to reduce. We need to reduce the overall plastics. We need to go to different business models of delivery systems. And those are happening in incredible places around the world. But those are some of my initial thoughts on those. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. Tim and Dorothy, I'd love to come to you in a moment, but first, Sonia, I think it would be particularly powerful to hear from you, provided that in your role at Global Action Plan, you're always bringing together different stakeholders and bringing different voices into the room. And I think you can really speak to the incredible power of that cross-dialogue, whether it is intergenerational or whether it is, coming from the charity sector, then engaging with business. I'd love to hear from you about what you've seen in terms of bringing that diversity of voices and experiences together, and what you would like to see going forward from that perspective of environmental charity when you are engaging with business and when you are setting those agendas.
I was certainly surprised at just how incredibly sophisticated they were. I think I'd naively thought they might be looking at slightly more popularist calls and it might just be an end to single-use plastics, but instead they came up with an incredibly informed and ambitious set of, as Jennifer said, systemic calls that are really worthy of any environmental NGO. And I suppose from a sort of a business and sort of government point of view, I think it can be really easy to understand why young people don't feel like they're being listened to and don't care, and others don't care, because they're not seeing the major signals that are really commensurate with the scale of the challenge that they're concerned about. So whether that's signals from government, like putting climate change on the curriculum to show that it is that important, or I think, as Jennifer was saying, with businesses, actually, businesses making radical changes and going, look, this business model doesn't stack up in a circular economy, rather than just sort of tinkering with the kind of the supply chain or the emissions associated with manufacturing. So I think young people really need to see the big actions and the big signals, and quite rightly so. So in terms of sort of the cross-sector collaboration, obviously that's absolutely critical. And it's great to see more businesses getting behind, say, some of the calls for things like climate change on the curriculum, which I know is the subject of the next conversation in this youth agenda piece. But it is absolutely vital for companies to be working with NGOs and also listening to young people and involving those young people in their decisions, in their thinking around their new business models, in their future products, because those young people are calling for this radical change and will be that future customer and that future human on the planet. So I think it is absolutely critical that businesses are collaborating and making ambitious steps in line with their 1.5 degree trajectory.
Thank you, Sonia. Now, Tim and Dorothy, you're the ones who are tasked with putting these changes into action. And I think both of you spoke to, very humbly to the fact that, you don't have all of the answers, and perhaps it's hard to know whether you are pushing that agenda far enough. How do you know when you are pushing the agenda? How do you know that you are, being leaders and disruptors within your industries? One of the things that Andra, our incredible youth climate ambassador, spoke to is that it really only takes one big incumbent, one big player to take ownership of a problem and say, even to forego increased profits for the next 10-year period, we realize that we have a responsibility and, in fact, a huge role to play in driving forward change at that system level. I'd love to hear from each of you what that looks like within your organizations and how you can ensure that you truly are leading toward that better, brighter future that we all know is possible, but yet often feels quite far away.
Yeah, I can start if you like. I think the simple answer to how do I know if we're pushing it hard enough is really how many no's and yeses I get internally in the company. I keep getting yeses, as in we should do this and we should do that and we should do, then I'm not pushing hard enough. I'm not creating enough tension internally. I as soon as I get a no or not yet, and I'm like, okay, now we're at the edge of what's possible, and then how do we go beyond that edge? I think that's the simple answer. I think in terms of, we heard a lot from all of the youth ambassadors and throughout the programs around who's responsible, and I think it's something that's we all need to tease out, because I think we're all responsible in different ways. We all need to play our role. We as a company want to do it. We know consumers want it. And I think one of the most powerful things we've done is really invested heavily in what we call consumer insights to really understand on sustainability, what is it consumers want. We did a materiality assessment 2 years ago, which is a process where you find out from your stakeholders what they want you to do. And we asked NGOs like Greenpeace, we asked governments. And for the first time, and certainly we hadn't understood that anyone else had done it, we worked with a company to do this piece of work. And we said, well, we want to ask children and young people what they want. And the company said, well, we've never done that before. We've never heard of a company asking children and young people what's material to them and what should you do. So we went through an amazing process there of getting to the bottom of what children and young people are expecting from us. And and I think that's part of our dynamic at the moment, is understanding what children and young people want, what parents want, what governments want, and what we want as a company, and trying to find that route through. I think you also asked around how do we sort of introduce young people to this journey, and what products and services are a vehicle. And I think we feel very strongly that Lego bricks are a fantastic vehicle. We run a huge program called Build the Change, where we ask children and young people to get a pile of Lego bricks, used, don't have to be new, but build the future that they want to see. And I think what we found is that is a way that we can use our product to give people a voice, and we take those models to decision makers, whether that's at COP, whether that's the Mayor of London, whoever that is, and say, look, here's 16, 20 models. We can tell you, all of the stories that have been built into these models about the sustainable school that these children want, or the sustainable city. So I think it's continuing a two-way dialogue with children and young people. What is it you want? What do you expect us to do? Where can you challenge us? And we're hoping to sort of look into setting up a children's board at some point in the future as well as inspiring children the other way with some of the work we're doing as well. And I think the final point is, I think we went into a process of engaging with kids some years ago, probably 5-10 years ago, and I think we felt, well, we're just going to come along and teach these children everything they need to know, and within 5 minutes you realize it's the other way around, and we've got a lot to learn and a lot to be inspired about, and that's the journey that we're on.
And I guess I would echo what Tim says in terms of, when you're going fast enough, when you're really the squeaky wheel in the system, and when you have the uncomfortable conversations, and when the most senior people in the company call you up and say, like, these things you want to propose, how does that actually work, and how can this get done? But I also want to make a point around, there's often a frustration for people who work on sustainability topics around the pace of change, right? Because obviously if you walk alone, you can go very fast, but if you want to bring the whole organization along, you can go further, but sometimes it's a little bit slower up front. So it's about getting that balance right between really embedding and cultivating what we want to do, and get enough people on board and understand and find the solutions, and then building from there in a faster way. But I think so at Vodafone, the target that we've set that I mentioned around enabling the decarbonization of society, that did raise a lot of eyebrows of, okay, how are we going to get this done? How does this work, etc.? How do we measure it? So we've set ourselves an ambitious target there, I think. But as I mentioned, there's always more to do. And just also maybe to quickly comment on the call. So I was also very impressed. They're incredibly inspiring, thoughtful and heartfelt and powerful, and also very comprehensive in terms of, as a package, they really tackle all of the big buckets where change needs to happen. I guess maybe the surprise, and obviously it's probably because they're calls to business and governments, is that there was nothing really very specific in there around behavior change, where obviously there could be an ask around, campaigns around, the impact of meat on the environment, sensibilization campaigns, demand side legislation, and all of those things. So that was kind of my only, surprise to some extent. But then also a word of encouragement, like don't hand them over their calls, but like own them and help deliver them and show how it's done, because it's not about, it's often said about youth, how they're the leaders of the future, but you need to be the leaders today. So keep ownership of them as well.
Sure, yeah. I think on the individual behavior change front, I think the reason why there was less focus on that specifically is because behavior change has for so long been used as a scapegoat by businesses to really place the responsibility and the weight of the issues on the individuals, when in fact those in positions of power, their decisions equate many millions of individual actions. To that point, Jennifer, I see you want to dive in as well.
Yeah, thanks, Clover. I wanted to, because you asked about this, and I wanted to come back in because I really think we need to reset this conversation. Like, I think youth has been so clear what they want. They want a future that gives them a high probability of staying below 1.5, which means stability for them, which means having a life that they're not surrounded by complete chaos. And we know what needs to happen. We've known this for decades, right? So if you ask me what it looks like if a company is really acting, that's their own footprint for sure, but it is also about being part of the solution of getting the mandatory laws in place that do turn us to a slow circular economy, that do shift us from industrial agriculture, that do make sure that we're not just creating the next gadget. And I just think, I don't know how you feel, but I feel this huge. My experience is that there's often this transfer of responsibility now. Like there's this, oh, it's okay now because youth is on it. No, we are responsible. Our generation is responsible. And so it's good to engage, of course, and Greenpeace does a lot of that, but we got to fix it. And I think it's that the link that I always see that is missing is these science-based targets, although we can look at the verification of all of that. It's the commitment to this or that. But when it comes time to being on the floor of the US Congress or the European Parliament or the Australian, they're not there. They're not there. And the fossil fuel guys, they're there. They are there. So I think showing up in those debates takes a lot of courage, but youth is showing so much courage right now. And I don't want them to have to be engaging and spending all their time on this. I mean, we should be doing it. Thanks.
Thanks, Jennifer. Sonia.
Just really in support of that. I mean, we've, had really heart-wrenching sort of accounts of young people sort of in tears on video to us saying, I feel this is all on my shoulders to fix. I feel no one is acting on this. I feel that I am alone and that my parents and that businesses aren't doing anything. And that's not cool, right? As Jennifer says, that a lot of these children don't have a vote even. They're not past that age, and so we shouldn't be putting the weight of solving these problems on their shoulders. Instead, we should be listening to their calls and taking the action that they are asking for, and not turning it around and saying, well, actually, you should all be doing these things. So I'm very much in favour of looking at the major changes we need to put in place in terms of regulation and in terms of business change, rather than putting that on the shoulders of the young people who already feel desperately the weight of this problem.
Absolutely.
And I couldn't agree more, by the way.
Yeah.
So I think that's absolutely right, and points very, very well made. And I think, if anything, also the COVID crisis now has at least shown society, and has been a moment where society has come together in a different way between policymakers and companies, and the role of business in society is changing. I think that is really for the better. And so, there's a huge increase just on the Vodafone side on the engagement with EU institutions, with policymakers around, discussing the solutions, discussing how legislation can be working in the best way, etc., with a view of building back together. So I hope there is something in the mindset and the mentalities that has started to change.
Thank you, Dorothy. Yeah, I feel that in climate, often we conflate fault with responsibility. And I've seen it with working with business leaders who point the finger at regulation, point the finger at policymakers. I've seen it with policymakers who, once again, point the finger back at business. And really, this is an invitation at this moment in time for each and every one of us, to Tim's point, to really take ownership and to really take responsibility. What worries me and concerns me, and this is to Sonia's point, is that lots of young people are shutting down. When I asked my parents about the future they envisioned, it was one of flying cars and deadly disease being eradicated. And yet when I speak to 8 and 9-year-olds in the classroom today and ask them, what does the future look like for you? They're describing something out of a dystopian Hollywood blockbuster of empty supermarket shelves and cities underwater, a planet in decline, the kind of place that no one wants to inherit or grow up in. And so young people are despairing, and that anxiety, that stress, that fear is not so much toward the threat of climate change or biodiversity collapse, so much as it is the inaction in the face of them. I think it creates this incredible dissonance when we see that we are in an emergency situation, that the challenges are urgent, and yet we've become so good at pretending otherwise and pretending that this kind of incrementalism is going to deliver those solutions. On the other end of the spectrum, I see a lot of powerlessness in business leaders. I see a lot of people in positions of perceived power who actually feel entirely beholden to the status quo. And yet that powerlessness doesn't show up in despair, but in denial. And not the cookie cutter denial of climate change isn't happening, but this kind of techno-utopianism that technology will save the day, or to Jennifer's point, that young people will magically step up and solve the problems, even when we're not currently being supported to. So with that, we do have to bring today's session to a close, but I think it's been really, really powerful to have this conversation and to bring a diversity of perspectives. And to Jennifer's point as well, I think this really is about each and every one of us, business leaders, policymakers, individuals, students, concerned mums and dads, really seeing the power of us stepping up in collective and taking ownership. But thank you so much for the opportunity, and really look forward to carrying forward the conversation.
Right on, Clover. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for staying with us here at the 11th Sustainable Innovation Forum. We're focusing this part of the third day of our 5 days on the youth agenda. We've just had a remarkable 90 minutes where we heard from youth ambassadors. Their literacy, their grip at the ages of 15, 16 and 17 was quite remarkable and very heartening given the enormity of what is now being faced, particularly on the climate emergency. We heard of the SOS from the Kids, a remarkable song which has been composed last week, asking adults to change the story, from the Youth Climate Summit, which brought together 1,000 schools last week. And you can get more on that from globalactionplan.org. We also heard from several leading organizations, including Vodafone, Lego, and Greenpeace, who underscored what they are doing. They're right at the forefront of what needs to be done on this. But if I just quote to you, we heard from a senior figure at Lego saying, "We thought we could bring in kids to tell them how to do it. What we've now realized is that they should be telling us what to do in a company like ours." They're thinking of setting up a children's board. We heard from the head of sustainability at Vodafone with 300 million subscribers saying, "I'm an impatient mother. We do a lot on climate, but I can't say it's enough." And then from Greenpeace, from the executive director, it's clear what kids want, a chance they will survive. But this, she said, requires a huge transfer of responsibility. More to come in that vein on the youth agenda just in one moment. But let me tell you how you can communicate with us, because this has to be a two-way conversation. So let me just give you the details for those of you who are just joining us about what you need to do. You need to go onto the platform which you're watching this on, and you can then go to just below to the live discussion box, and you can type in whatever you want to say, whether a question or a comment, and start also with who you'd like to address and what organization you're from. And we also would like to see your messages at Climate Action, at climate_action_. And the hashtag is Climate Action Live, all one word. Hashtag SIF20, SIF20, and hashtag Time You Act. Please make this a dialogue. We want to hear from you, not just us sitting in the studio or wherever. Now, what's coming up in the next 60 minutes? We're going to have a discussion shortly with Bertrand Piccard, who is the initiator and chairman at Solar Impulse Foundation. And the final panel in this section before we break, before what in Europe will be the afternoon session, is formalizing the climate curriculum, the role of climate education to enhance global ambition. We'll also have an intervention from Charles Perry, who's the lead for special projects and aviation for Race to Zero and the COP26 high-level climate champion. Charles will be telling us about what Race to Zero campaign is doing to support youth activism, particularly focusing on the next gen, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z. But first, let's go to Berlin, where I'm joined by Nick Nuttall, who's Strategic Communications Director for EarthDay.org. Nick, welcome. You're former Director of Communications at UNFCCC. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Nick, and thanks very much for the introduction. Yes, you're absolutely right. We've got a great program lined up here. We're going to be looking very closely at the issue of climate education. We feel it's maybe perhaps a slightly neglected area in the big climate action and climate ambition story. But before, as you rightly said, we're going to go to Bertrand Piccard, Switzerland right now. I mean, Bertrand doesn't need much introduction. I mean, I think it's, what, 5 years, Bertrand, since you and your co-pilot, Andre Borschberg, piloted the amazing Solar Impulse aircraft around the world. And I think you not only inspired citizens, but I think you inspired youth, and you inspired business, and you inspired governments to actually take some of the important decisions that led to the Paris Climate Change Agreement. So before we come to talking about youth in specific terms, Bertrand, tell me, what have you been doing over the last 5 years? What have you been up to in Switzerland and around the world? Give us an insight into your journey of the last 5 years since Solar Impulse.
Hello, Nick, and hello to everyone. I'm doing now the second phase of my vision, because Solar Impulse, as the airplane who flew with electric engines and solar power around the world, was symbolic. It's true that it's not very practical today to put 200 people in such an airplane. But now I'm making the second phase, which is very practical. It is to identify 1,000 technological solutions that can protect the environment in a financially profitable way, and bring all these solutions to heads of states, big corporations, investors, institutions, in order to give them the tools that they need to reach their environmental targets, their environmental policies, the energy efficiency that will help to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. And it's very important to see that in every field, in water, energy, construction, mobility, agriculture, industry, there are a lot of solutions. And the goal is 1,000, but now we have already identified 810 proofs that the protection of the environment is more profitable than the destruction of the environment.
Bertrand, give us a little insight into, I mean, maybe you could give an example of an aviation, giving a link with Solar Impulse, an aviation technological development that is particularly attractive that you've noticed in these 810 plus technologies.
Yes, there is a software called Skybreath, which is helping the pilots of commercial flights to save fuel by optimizing the flight plan, in particular with meteorological conditions and so on. For a flight, it's 5% of fuel saving. There are also some tractors, electric tractors, to bring the airplane to the threshold. There is an Zero Avia. It's a hydrogen airplane flying already in America. There is H55 from Andre Borschberg, my partner in Solar Impulse, who is electrifying the propulsion of training airplanes for aero clubs. So just if you see aviation, the aviation part of our portfolio, it's already very promising, but there are things like that everywhere. And I give you another example for mobility that I love. It's a little module that you can install on the thermal engine of your car or your truck, and it saves 20% of the fuel, and it reduces by 80% reduction in the emission of particles in order to make the air much cleaner in the cities. But we have to fight to make all these solutions better known and to include them into the recovery plan for the after COVID economy. We have to show that it is something that also should be pushed by the regulation. Otherwise, it will remain in the startup and it will never create any job.
Yeah. And where do you fit in this? Because, I mean, there's a lot of young creative entrepreneurs right now who are trying to develop some of the solutions. Do you find in your solutions that you're looking at, there is a youth imprint on these really amazing ideas?
Yes, so some of these solutions are provided by big corporations who are very well established all the oceans are sometimes not known, but a lot of them, a lot of these solutions come from startups, for small companies, and some of them are also in developing countries. So it is very important now to push the knowledge that there are so many startups who can bloom on the market if only the regulation was creating a need to bring these solutions to the market. Because as long as the regulation allows to pollute, allows to put as much particles, CO2 in the atmosphere, plastic in the ocean, toxical and chemical products in the soil, everybody will say, what I'm doing is legal. There is no reason to change. So we have to work on the regulation to be, to modernize the regulation, create the need, and then it will pull all these startups to the market. It will create jobs. It will push the economy, which at the end is important because it shows that economical development is possible when we replace polluting stuff by environmental friendly products.
So Bertrand, you know, we've known each other some time. I used to work at UNEP, and then I worked at UNFCCC and as director of comms of both organizations, journalist in the 1990s writing on environment. I think of all the wealth of reports that have been published on all the possibilities of the transition, everything that we can do to actually get onto a climate-friendly path. And yet you still come across people who still aren't sure that really we should be doing much. We still come across people who are perhaps not very active, even if they understand climate change is important, they're not very active. Do you think, therefore, that we still need to shed and share the optimism of these brilliant technological breakthroughs, but is there something missing in the public awareness space or even in the education space of the global public to understand both the risks but also these enormous opportunities for a transformation?
Yes, I think that a lot of companies, a lot of people, a lot of politicians have understood in which direction we have to go. And some are going there. When you see that the British government has just announced that they will ban all the thermal engines for cars, for new cars in 2030, it's ambitious, it's very good. I pull my hat, fantastic. But there are others who don't do it. And you also see companies, big corporations, who take a lot of commitments and they do it well. So they show all these people, all these pioneers, they show that it's possible to do it. And then you have the one who resists. And because it's possible to do it, the one who resists have to be pushed by the regulation. And if it needs, they need to be helped. They sometimes need to be supported because it's obvious that the oil industry cannot collapse. It would make millions of people unemployed. So we need a big level collaboration instead of fighting against the others. If we collaborate with oil industries, we will help them to diversify, give them access to new markets, like drilling for geothermia, like hydrogen, like investment in renewable energies, in clean technologies. And they can invest in a lot of energy efficiency fields in order to remain powerful and wealthy, which is the goal. We should avoid to have losers. And I think in the past, we had too many losers, and we have to include everyone in order to that everyone has an interest to do it. And the one who resist, who don't want to get into this game, they have to be pushed by regulation.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point there. I mean, the Labour organization would talk about a just transition, wouldn't they? I think in the past, maybe as environmentalists, we often celebrated when a coal-fired power station was shut down, which quite rightly in terms of its climate impacts, but forgot that there were communities and jobs and people that would pay a price for that shutdown without having any opportunity to have livelihoods and a prospect for the future. Yeah, so we need that just transition, as you rightly point out. Bertrand, so you kindly were one of the early signers of this global climate education and literacy campaign, which earthday.org is spearheading. You'll be pleased to know we've got something like more than 350 organizations that have now signed up for this campaign, which is to try and persuade governments to do something that they promised in 1992 when they set up the UNFCCC, the famous Rio Earth Summit, which was to provide climate education, and still very patchy, and we think it's time to change that around with COP26. So give me just a little glimpse. Why did you join this campaign? Why did you think it was worth putting your signature to such a thing?
Education is important in general, but in climate change field, extremely crucial, because we have to understand that climate change today is based on science and not on political. And
right, we just
fake news. Population, people invest the game for you because the new jobs will happen. This is completely smart. Example, the management of waste, to recycle, to go into circular economy, to make energy, to make biofuels with waste. All these is very, very promising. And the children today who have to envisage their future, their jobs, their studies, in which field do they go? They have to know about it in order to make the right choices. And the third very important reason for that, education and climate change, is to give hope. Because we hear that children are depressed. There were children committing suicide because they're afraid of the future. They believe they have no future. And climate education will explain them that there are solutions, that there are profitable ways to deal with climate change, and they can be part of it. It gives hope. So it's very, very important. And nevertheless, I think the education should not be limited to children and students. It should also be implemented for our leaders, because we have some leaders who have not understood that at all in this world.
Yeah, good point, Bertram. And maybe we should actually include in our campaign that all heads of state and ministers and this sort of thing should go back to school for a couple of years just to learn about the reality. Yeah, great, Bertram. Look, it's been absolutely fantastic to have you on the show. It's great to see you as usual. Congratulations on the amazing work you're doing, and we look forward to the 1,000 technologies coming out and the information being shared about how they can contribute to a better world. So we really take your hats off, and hats off to Andrea as well when you next see him, your co-pilot on Solar Impulse. We're now going to pivot in. We're going to pivot into a different section now, Bertram, the panel section, and you're welcome to stay on the line, but I'm sure you have other things to do. So thank you very much indeed. Okay, bye. Right, ladies and gentlemen, viewers from around the globe, delighted now to introduce this very diverse panel to look at the importance of climate education for combating climate change and building a sustainable future. I must say, when I got involved in this campaign, I was wondering a little bit about it, and then you only have to go to an amazing paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, written by brilliant scientists like Johan Rockström and Schnellenhuber of the Potsdam Institute, and Mark McAfee, who's been involved in social sciences for many years. And this says we need 6 societal transformations to stabilize the Earth's climate, in other words, to meet the Paris Agreement. And one of those 6 things is climate education. So in fact, there's really a growing level of science to say we absolutely need to systematically educate our children and our university students as well on the issue of climate change. I want to first introduce Kathleen Rogers, who is the president of earthday.org, one of the world's great and one of the world's oldest and diverse environmental NGOs. Kathleen, I wonder if you could give us a glimpse into why earthday.org has actually initiated this campaign on climate education, with an eye on COP26 coming up next year in the UK?
Sure, Nick, thank you. And thanks for having me. This is a really critical forum for a discussion about this. Earth Day Network's in the movement building business. And in 1970, 20 million people came out on the streets and launched the modern environmental movement. But along that way, unfortunately, both the United States and around the world never really addressed the issue of environmental education. And now, of course, 50 years later, climate education. So Earth Day Network, which has long been in the business of environmental education, along with many other groups, finally got together and said, this is really the poor stepchild of our movement. And neither foundations nor governments have invested in students enough and in any practical way to build the skills that they need to deal with environmental issues. And those include not just the literacy, which to be distinguished from education, but also the civic skills that they need in an increasingly complex world because of climate change to deal with local and regional issues. So Earth Day Network believes that the forum, the COP forum and the Convention on Climate Change is a perfect place to begin to renew and look again at promoting climate and environmental literacy. In our view, and along with the 350 other organizations, which include over 300 million union members, both teachers and labor, along with university presence, have all joined together to ask world leaders to include in the ACE provisions of the Climate Convention mandatory climate and environmental education, along with civic engagement tools. And that includes teaching environmental education using their civics department. And so this petition, which has now gained much global support, including a wide range of people, faith groups, mayors, educators, is now in a position, and we're working with countries around the world to ask them to sign up in advance of the COP in Glasgow next year and during the pre-COP in Milan to bring youth and corporations and other leaders together to agree that this is something that will, as Bertrand said, really advance social entrepreneurism, create civic engagement skills among people, and basically give them the kind of optimism that they need to deal with the coming crisis. So it's a very positive campaign, but it is going to be driven by countries around the world. We did a World Bank study of many countries and their climate education systems. And what we discovered is not a single one had adequate climate or environmental education or literacy objectives. It wasn't tested, it wasn't compulsory. And so we have two problems. The first is that we have an anemic response to climate change by the global population. And second, we are not creating either an educated workforce looking forward to green jobs, nor a green consumer movement. So those are the three objectives that we have in promoting climate and environmental literacy worldwide.
Right. Thank you very much, Kathleen. Let me now go over to Haldis Holst, who's the Deputy Secretary General of Education International, which is basically the world's largest, if I'm right, Haldis, the world's largest federation of teachers, unions and teachers. One of the organizations that actually has signed up to this global climate education and literacy campaign. I suppose the question is why, Haldis, but also, you know, what does it mean for teachers? How are teachers dealing with this topic? And maybe you could give us some perspectives and some insights into those areas. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nick, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here. Yes, we do represent a lot of teachers. I think if you break down the numbers, it's 32.5 million teachers and education support personnel. The issue of climate literacy, climate education, that you use different terms around the world, has actually been on our agenda for very many years. But it has taken time to sort of get it on the top of the agenda so it's heard. But it's in, I would say, the DNA of teachers, because our purpose through our professional lives is to prepare young people for a future. And I think we heard just in the introduction here that young people had expressed that they need hope for the future. And we need to educate them in the way that we create that hope. And one of the things we do that through is embedding knowledge, because having knowledge gives a feeling that you also can create change, and also to embed in them the tools that they possibly can use for this. And we were very pleased when the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted, where you have sustainable development, where climate education is part of it, as part of Goal 4.7 under the education goal. And you also have education referenced through the climate goal, Goal 13. So in a way, the world has committed, and it's about how we can bring that commitment from just sort of nice words to actually action on the ground. Now, we know it takes time to change curriculum, because you don't have curriculum reforms every day, and there's still a lot to be done. But there are countries that are moving and that slowly are changing their curriculum. What they need to do at the same time is to acknowledge that teachers like me, we were not educated in a time where these issues were on top of the agenda. So, it's not just political leaders that need climate education. The educators of the world need it too, to be able to do their job professionally and in a relevant way for the students they are teaching. So you need the curriculum reforms, but you also need the support, the system that enhances that teachers can do this. So you don't base it on individual activists, but that it's a collective responsibility that the educators feel that they are able to do. And our member organizations are trying to support their members in doing this. And we have asks from all over the world based on, we want to do this. How can you support us so that our members are better equipped to go into the classroom and be relevant for their students? Because that's what it's about. We must listen to the voices of young people, that this is something that they want.
Yeah. Super, Hans. We'll come back on this when we're having our chat. But let me go now to Tati Lindenberg of Unilever. She's Vice President of Marketing for one of Unilever's largest home care business areas, Dirt for Good. And Tati, Unilever, as was mentioned by Bertrand, is a company that many people who follow climate change and environmental activities know for your often constant pushing at the sustainability envelope and trying to open it up. But you're interested in education too. And if you could give us a little insight into what you're planning, what you're doing with this area of Unilever's business in terms of education.
Yeah, super. Well, thank you for the opportunity, first of all. So to clarify, especially for younger people, so Dirt is Good is a laundry detergent business and brand, which groups multiple brands under different names, but the same positioning or ideas, such as Persil in the UK, Skip in France, Omo in Brazil, China, and Vietnam. And the brand was built on a fundamental human dilemma: how much to protect our children and how much freedom to give them to experience the world, learn, develop, and ultimately unleash their potential. And for 20 years, the brand supported parents in giving their children freedom to get dirty, celebrating it as a mark of child development, as well as a life fully lived. And we did this through campaigns, partnerships, and especially with Outdoor Classroom Day, which reached almost 10 million children across 100 countries. However, and that's the reason why we're here, the world changed so dramatically and so fast, we were left with no option but to bring another dimension to the brand. And that's why what we've done was acknowledging first the environmental and social challenges we've been facing. And by partnering with Global Action Plan, we conducted a vast and comprehensive research to understand how such challenges are impacting young people around the world. And we uncovered two fundamental, I would say, paradoxes. One, protection and freedom is still on. So parents nowadays, I don't know how many of you watching actually have children, but they feel overwhelmed, and only 1 in 4 feels optimistic about the world their children will grow up into. And that makes them tend to shield their children from the reality of today. However, given the new social landscape, the unlimited access to a lot of information, children, even the youngest one with like 6, 7 years old, they are very aware of the reality they are facing. And this makes them concerned and anxious by issues like climate change, because they will be the generation most affected, obviously. And the second big paradox that we uncovered is this idea about normalizing being kinder to the planet. And this is where climate education and literacy comes in. So young people deeply care about our large societal issues and the planet, and they want to take action, no matter how messy and big these challenges are. But a major factor affecting youth actions is that they feel isolated, and they believe that others around them, be it like peers, friends, teachers, big businesses, don't care as much as they do. And this mismatch is called the values perception gap. Therefore, we believe that it's important that young people see others, especially governments and businesses like Unilever, like Dirt is Good, taking action. So this creates momentum, galvanizes society, and ensures that they don't feel alone in their concerns. And our research shows that when it's the case and they feel that everyone is taking action, it ladders up to more positive action being taken and better well-being for young people. So to conclude, as a business and as a brand, we have huge responsibility to take positive action ourselves. And that's why we want to mainstream sustainability. We want to transform our products, and we started doing so to be more sustainable, kinder to the planet. And that's why we are using more renewable ingredients, more biodegradable, less plastic. And given our sheer size, I don't know how many of you know, but we reach more people than Instagram nowadays. So we do know that by doing it, we push the industry to become more sustainable. Nevertheless, as a brand with purpose, we need to go beyond products and invest into a school program, which is what we are doing as of 2021. And we wanted to help young people to take collective action on environment and social issues. And we want to show them that we are all united in action, however big or small.
Thanks, Tati. That's nice to get the business perspective there. And last but not least, let us hear from Federico Cincopalmi. He's head of unit for internationalization of higher education, Ministry for Universities and Research at the government of Italy. And remembering, of course, that Italy is a co-host with the United Kingdom of the next UN climate conference, COP26. Federico, we've heard a lot about schools here so far. And of course, you know, Italy certainly grabbed the headlines last year when you became something of a poster child for the climate education movement by announcing compulsory climate education in schools. So we've heard a lot about the schools, but your work is focused on higher education, Federico. And we'd like to make that link between the schools and higher education, and wondered if you could give us your insight into how is this greening, this environmental agenda, this climate agenda now percolating through the universities and colleges and areas of higher education in Italy, and maybe something of the international dimension that we chatted about this morning. Over to you, Federico. Have we lost Federico? Hello, everybody. Okay. Looks like we lost Federico, so when he comes back, we shall discuss this further. Okay, Kathleen, you looks like you might have a change of administration in the United States.
Oh, there we are.
No, Federico's coming back, is he?
Yeah, I am. Sorry, but
it's okay, Federico. Did you hear my introduction? Did you hear my introduction?
Unfortunately, no, but I believe you.
Okay, we want you to talk about the higher education dimension of climate education, higher education. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's a bit shaky, but we're going to do our best.
It seems that I'm frozen, but it's all right. Despite our let's say concern of this morning, I see that I feel perfectly fitting on this roundtable, because as I heard from Bertrand and from the other colleagues, at the end of the day, I think that the real engine of this is related with universities, because all teachers are passing through universities for their graduation, and probably most of us also have the same track, at least the better ones, I guess. So it is important to reconstruct that sustainability in general terms, but climate issues in part of the programs of the universities, not just in those tracks that are already, let's say, very focused on that specific issues, like the environmental graduation tracks or the one, but also in general terms. And it's exactly in Italy. Our last Minister of Education and Research was particularly keen on that specific issue, and was encouraging the conference of the Italian rectors to move in that direction. So universities in Italy have formed an alliance for sustainability, trying to implement as much as possible the competence of sustainability and climate matters in all possible tracks of their didactical offer. And in specific, but they work together a lot in the specific field, organizing transversal for formation activities. But the one most interesting and promising at the moment is the exercise that is trying to implement Sapienza University in Rome, the largest university in Europe with more than 205,000 people working on it. It's like a city. And approved with the last rector was to implement credits for sustainability and climate change in all sectors of teaching. It means from medicine to economy, from physics to architecture. So it's getting mandatory, exactly like having the credits for English, for example, and it sounds very reasonable. Certainly, competences, as we clearly get from our previous panelists, are transversal and needs to be that way. Regarding the problem of teaching to teachers, tackled by the colleague of Education International, that I really thank for her intervention. Well, we saw, we had a very interesting field test during the recent pandemic, how difficult it is sometimes intervening on the competence, on advanced competences of teachers in an emergency situation. The competences of a digital device are a test on in an emergency situation could be complicated. Implement new technologies or new knowledge on the teacher setup. They are used to teach in a very traditional way. They have their own programs, and sometimes they are not very young people. So it's sometimes difficult to bring them back.
Yeah.
I keep thinking that a good action of let's say working on the new generation of teachers in one side and help the teachers that are already teaching from quite a long time in the other side, and acting in a way, let's say, of moral suasion on certainly fields like the knowledge regarding sustainability and climate change is the key point.
Thanks, Federico. Federico, can we just stop you there? Because these are all very, very good points. We now just want to go to a little chat with the panelists and maybe take some questions from the audience. So I think these were very good points you made, Federico. We'll come back to you in a second. So Kathleen, just quickly, you're going to have a change of administration in the US, fingers crossed. And what does that mean for the USA getting back into climate action, but also into the area of climate education? and maybe even supporting developing countries with their ambition to achieve climate education in schools?
In our petition to Patricia Espinosa, and our goal of getting all countries to sign on, of course, starts with the US for us. And I do think there'll be action in the United States, most of it executive, because of the differences that are going on in our Congress and the split of control, at least for now. But again, I think this is a wave that we're seeing, that EarthDay.org and the other organizations, governments, and everyone else who signed on to this. So we're super optimistic that both the United States and many countries will support this project. I do think what I've heard about universities is particularly true, because with those presidents that have signed on to our agreement, we're finding many of them are very enthusiastic about having a new generation of students who are educated. So we're hoping the United States will become involved. There will be enabling legislation that would change many of our laws. We saw this around the world, by the way, just quickly, in the technology age, where the United States and many other countries passed what we call competitiveness acts. And they promoted and financed computer literacy and technology literacy 15, 18 years ago. And that fostered an entire generation of people who both were knowledgeable and active on the subject. So we're using some of this across the world as models for our own legislation and globally. One last thing, we are dealing in the United States with 50 individual states that have their own systems, just like India has 29 states and individual education systems. And while some of it is mandated from the federal government down, depending on the country, there's a lot of leeway at the local level, which ends up giving us a patchwork of teachers and competence and training. So we are trying to uniform this, create a uniform response to this, which I think will help with the optimism, the jobs, the green consumer movement, and an active citizenry, which we desperately need because of climate change.
Haldis, I want to ask you one thing from the teaching perspective and the education perspective, because, you know, having witnessed myself, and I'm sure you have and everybody else on this program, that when you get to these big climate conferences, and even in the process leading up to it, these days they're supposed to be involving all ministries of government and things like that. But actually, in reality, at the COPs, you end up with the Environment Ministry, the Foreign Affairs Ministry, sometimes the Energy Ministry, sometimes economic stuff. You get side events all around the place on education, all kinds of things, agriculture. But actually in the negotiations, you've really got basically environment and foreign affairs. Education doesn't really get a look in. So how do we break through that glass wall? How can we bring the education ministries, the educationalists, into the negotiations so we get climate education in schools all across the world, because governments agree to do that as a result of COP26?
Answer to that, and I think that this is a problem in very many areas, that it becomes you compartmentalize, that you sort of have the relevant minister and you're not quite sure whether they speak together. But my immediate answer would be that you need to work bottom up. And that's where I think that also we can help, having member organizations in every country, because it's easier to see things across ministries and areas of responsibility at national level. And that is confronting them and making them responsible and seeing how it's relevant in their country. You know, I had just about my last travel before the COVID-19 lockdown, I was in Accra in Ghana, and there was a regional meeting of our member organizations in Africa, and had a conversation with a very engaged general secretary of one of our member organizations in Gabon. And he was very passionate about climate education. And he was, of course, bottom up. He was engaged in how can we do this in Gabon, when they were referencing their gigantic tropical forests and how they can preserve them. How can we educate our children to be part of that? And how can we see also development aid supporting climate change actions, but are not including education? And, he referenced the Development Aid Agency in Norway. So you contact the member organization in Norway, and how can you sort of influence that education has to be part of projects that are to preserve the environment? One example. So you have to sort of connect the dots, but I think that so we need the pressure bottom up and top down. and combining that, and also with what Unilever said. One of the methodologies I know is used in schools here in Norway is project-based. You pick a product and you trace it, and you have the students identify the climate footprint of that project. You can also do other ethical assessments, like, has child labor been used in the production and so on. So it's about finding the correct entrance point in practice and sharing that practice, but also doing the political work on the ground. So I would say combined bottom up, top down.
Yeah. Tati, when you go about your work, I mean, you're Unilever, but you're on there's many organizations, sustainable business organizations out there. Do you see other companies being aware of their responsibilities in terms of education, or are you unique at Unilever? Do you think it's something business should be really engaging with much more as a general issue?
Yes, absolutely, Nick. I think what we see more and more, of course, we have many niche brands or smaller brands in business who have been vocal for a few years about environment and making changes in their products and contributing to like climate or environmental education. And nowadays you see more and more of the big players like Unilever and like other players in the market doing so. But there is still a big gap between what we're doing with our products, which I have to say it's still a lot. And I believe that the biggest contribution that big companies like Unilever can do is to first fix the issues that we caused, and make sure that we can transform the industry. But there is still a lot more and a big opportunity for us to be more focused on climate education. And yes, I have to say that so far we are the only one doing that, at least with the scale that we have.
Yeah. Super, guys. Well, I've been giving lots of nods from the organizers. I get little messages on my phone about things I have to do, and they basically say, stop, Nick, stop. So we're coming to the end of the show. We've run out of time, but I think this is an important debate. It's just the beginning, or it's partway through, or it's on the road to an even longer debate. Let's get out there and inform the governments we want them to do the right thing, right or wrong, or deal with an issue that they promised to deal with almost 30 years ago and reaffirmed it in the Paris Agreement. And let's make sure that climate education doesn't keep falling through the cracks in many governments' response to climate change and environmental literacy generally. Federico Sincapami, thank you so much for coming in from Italy. Kathleen Rogers coming in from Washington, D.C. Haldis Holst coming in from Oslo, and Tati Lindenberg coming in from London. And thanks to the organizers for having us here. Bye.
So from one Nick to another, thank you very much indeed. And thanks to all your guests as well. And very energetic. I was very struck by a lot of what was said, but let me just repeat what Haldis talked about. She said, political leaders need education, but educators also need educating as well to be relevant for their students. So there's a lot to take away in this youth agenda. I'll be giving you details of what's going to come up in the second half of day 3 of the Sustainable Innovation Forum in a moment. But first, we go to Charles Perry, who's joining us. Charles, you're joining us to give us a thought about where things are going on the Race to Zero campaign. Charles Perry, lead of the Special Projects and Aviation at COP26 High-Level Climate Champion, the Race to Zero and Sustainable Future for All. Charles, come in with your live thoughts at this stage before I sum up and say where we're going in the afternoon, Europe time.
And thank you very much, Nick. Thank you to both Nicks for your excellent moderation, and to the organizers, Climate Action and Sustainable Innovation Forum with the partners Global Action Plan and Earth Day. It's a real pleasure to be with you. And I've been very moved listening to people talking today, and that video, the SOS from our kids from last week's Youth Climate Summit, that did get me actually quite emotional. So I think it's a really important moment to not only listen to young people, as Greta Thunberg has been saying for so long, but actually to collaborate in a radical way with young people to drive climate action as if there is a crisis, as if there is an emergency, which of course there is. So the COP26 climate champions, of which I am one, led by the two high-level champions, Nigel Topping from the UK and Gonzalo Munoz from Chile, COP25 and COP26 respectively. And with our colleagues, there are about 50 of us on the team, which is the non-UK government team. So we have this amazing mandate from the UN to be radical. Our primary focus is on non-state actors. That means on society, on business, on young people. And with the Race to Zero campaign, which I hope you're all part of, or if you're not part of, please become part of as soon as possible from today. We have just launched a new track called the People Track, which is aimed specifically at young people and society, communities, schools in particular there too. We've already got universities, about 550 universities signed up. So you can look on the UNFCCC, UN Framework for Climate Change website and track the number of sign-ups from the different sectors. So please do that, and please become what I call zero noughts. A zero nought leaves no footprint. Last week I was talking to an aviation-focused audience about astronauts, because I've been recently inspired by getting to know an amazing American woman called Dr. Catherine K.D. Coleman, who went in the space shuttle. She was an ex-colonel from the US Air Force, and she went and lived at the space station. And she inspired me with her perspectives, of the Earth from space in terms of her recollections and her encouragement for people like us to, really seize the moment. And an astronaut, by definition, astro from the Greek stars, aster, and naut, navigate, is sailing the stars. So likewise, I think zero nought is quite applicable. I'm not the first person, obviously, to come up with the phrase. My mentor, John Elkington, came up with it in a book called Zero Noughts, Breaking the Barriers. And that's about getting to zero with urgency. So if we can all become zero noughts, if we can all collaborate radically together with the young people leading us, I think the youth have a natural moral compass. I grew up with a faith about listening to young people because they can see, they can see life, they can see honesty. So I do already work with a number of young people. I'm on the youth track within the team, which is led by a colleague of mine, Shayo. Great team. So please get in touch with us. And yes, let's join forces radically, because essentially the goal is to solve pollution in all of its forms, not just carbon dioxide, all pollution. So it is really a battle. It's a war on pollution, if you like. We're not winning it at the moment, unfortunately. Good news, though, from the UK today, from the government, about a reset on a green industrial revolution. We've been pushing for that for a long time, so nice to see that front and center. And this pollution that I'm talking about, I've been conscious, from a very young age. Visible pollution first, and then invisible pollution. And what do we do about pollution? I mean, we actually have to get really tough on pollution. Now, I'll quickly just mention, in the 1800s, there was William Wilberforce, who took on another big moral crusade, the abolition of slavery. And of course, human energy was the basis of the world's economy in those days. And the British East India Company was one of the pioneers in that era. And of course, its whole business depended on, unfortunately, human energy in the form of slavery. Now, fast forward, We're at the end of the fossil fuel era. Fossil fuels replaced human energy, and we've got to the end now with 8 billion people burning within a week 1 million years worth of fossilized matter. It's totally unsustainable. So actually, we have to stop our addiction. It's very clear. We have to end our dependence and our use of fossil fuels. And I say that to you as someone who once worked for BP. We've got to end it. And if you like, we actually have to abolish the combustion of fossil fuels. Thank you.
What we heard from Adash, who's a 16-year-old, earlier today after the climate summit last week, when we saw the song which the kids were singing, an SOS from the kids, please change the story. Is there a danger of being a bit patronizing with the next generation? Because Adash said, and I'm quoting him here, these events give us hope for the future, but the system we live in does still contribute to climate change. So there has to be a change at system level. There has to be a change at business and government levels, not just the personal level. Do you really believe there's resonance at the highest levels? We're speaking at the same time as Boris Johnson is due to be meeting business leaders, having announced his 10 points overnight. Is there really an acceptance that the next generation have as loud a voice as those who are invested institutionally in the way things are at the moment?
Yes, Nick, I mean, Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, has broken the ice today, but it's only a start. I mean, you know, if we really think about this, the whole game has to change. The young people are so right. The whole game of our global system, our economic model has to change. Capitalism is no longer fit for purpose, right? That doesn't mean to say that we replace it with socialism or communism. We need a new model. It's an evolution from the 1.0 capitalism based on gross domestic product, which makes no sense. When we had the BP oil spill, luckily I had moved on, but still it was horrific to see BP, have the worst oil spill in history in the Gulf of Mexico. The GDP of Louisiana went up. How perverse is that? Because of the frenzy of activity cleaning up the oil. So GDP gone, has to go very soon. We need to move to more of a GSI, a Global Sustainability Index, which takes well-being, health, and most importantly, equity into consideration. That puts a value on what's valuable, the air we breathe, our rainforests, our soils, our ecosystems, right? And I'm not the first to say this, but the young people are right that the us as parents and in some cases grandparents, we haven't communicated and done what we should have done. And the onus really has been on us. And we have not done our jobs. So unfortunately, we've left it to young
Charles,
people.
Let me just press you, if I can, in the last minute we've got. So it's all very well saying that, and this is not about criticism of you, but you've had in your Race to Zero campaign a big youth dialogue, as you've just talked about. But is that really getting through to the chancelleries, the prime ministerial offices, the presidential offices, the parliamentary offices, a realization that the system that got all these people to where they are is no longer appropriate for the enormity of the kind of things we're hearing in this Sustainable Innovation Forum and what you've just been saying?
Yes, it absolutely is. The last 10 days, we've run our Race to Zero dialogues. And tomorrow is the last day of that. And I'm sure you've seen it. I'm sure the young people have seen it. It's been global. It's had all sorts of amazing people as part of it. The message is getting through. Governments are waking up. Now, really, fortunately, we have now a president coming into the White House in January that is putting climate change front and center like Boris Johnson is doing here. There is now hope. We can do it. Greta and all of the young people who've raised the alarm, thank you. They've done an amazing job. Now we need to work together with young people, with communities. They need to say to their parents, what are you doing? What are your companies doing? Everybody needs to join the Race to Zero and get on board from today.
All right, Charles. Well, thank you very much indeed. What we've been hearing is some really radical thoughts, particularly today. It's heartening, but also awesome. And I mean that literally, I've sat here for the last 2 hours listening to the remarks coming from the next generation and also the educators, realizing that there is a momentum and an accelerator which is picking up speed significantly. I wonder actually though whether the system can handle this. That's what we're going to be looking at in the last 2.5 days of the Sustainable Innovation Forum. Thank you to the Global Action Plan. Thank you to earthday.org for your ongoing work with the youth, climate activism and education, and of course with bringing us the program today. And Charles, thank you very much as well for joining us and taking time out from your dialogue. We're going to take a break for the next couple of hours. I'm just checking my watch, it is a couple of hours. And we're back literally in 2 hours' time at 1:38 p.m. GMT, which is 2:30 p.m. CET, and you can work out around the world where you fit into that time scale. We're going to be looking at sustainable mobility and the future of transportation. We're going to be joined by the Vice President for Sustainability for the BMW Group from Munich. We'll also be joined by Mighty, not known to everyone, but it is the largest facilities management corporation in the UK, and it has an enormous fleet of vehicles. What is it doing and what are its ambitions? What do they believe they can achieve? They're going to be making an announcement on that with a specific date, which is quite extraordinary, which is a timeline which is quite short of what they believe is now possible. Panels as well with the World Bank, with the Mayor of Helsinki and the former Mayor of Vancouver. So enjoy wherever you are in the world, your dinner, your lunch, your breakfast, have coffee, tea, go out for a walk, enjoy the environment while you can, and join us again literally in 1 hour and 55 minutes. See you then.